Welcome to Torture Vault, where history bleeds, and the screams of the past echo through the ages. Here, we uncover the darkest punishments, brutal executions, and horrifying truths the world tried to forget. Viewer discretion is advised, because this is not just history, this is horror, carved in flesh and blood. The shimmering waters of the Adriatic Sea once caressed the coasts of Krk with tranquil waves, masking the fury that would one day stain its soil with blood. In the 1380s, the region of Dalmatia, modern-day Croatia, was a volatile borderland caught between the territorial ambitions of Venice, Hungary, and local nobility like the House of Frankopan. At the heart of it lay the island of Krk, an ancient place with Roman roots and medieval strongholds. What should have been a sunlit paradise became a scene of unrelenting brutality during a forgotten battle, one not known for its scale, but for the horrific treatment of its prisoners. Krk's control shifted frequently between local lords and external empires. The island's strategic value was enormous. Whoever controlled Krk had access to trade routes and military leverage over coastal territories. In the early 1380s, as the War of Chioggia between Venice and Genoa spilled into the region, Krk's lords, particularly the powerful Frankopan family, became entangled in the geopolitics. But their ambitions would draw them into a dark web of vengeance and cruelty. When Venetian mercenaries, Croatian rebels, and Hungarian soldiers clashed near the castle of Krk, the battlefield quickly turned into a slaughterhouse. The Frankopans, allied with the Hungarian crown, sought to suppress rising rebellions and punish Venetian sympathizers. After a fierce confrontation near the harbor, over 200 enemy soldiers were taken prisoner. But these men were not treated according to the customs of chivalry. No, what awaited them was a form of retribution that defied even medieval standards. Under the command of Count Mikula Frankopan, a brutal punishment was ordered, one meant to send a message across the Adriatic. Instead of being ransomed or executed outright, the prisoners, many of whom were Genoese and Dalmatian mercenaries, were locked inside iron cages. These were no ordinary jails. They were custom forged from blacksmiths in Krk's lower quarter, open to the sun and wind, offering no protection from the elements. These cages were hoisted on poles and hung over cliffs and castle walls, their victims visible to townspeople, travelers, and birds of prey. The men inside were left without food, water, or mercy. The sun became their tormentor, and time, their slow executioner. As the days turned to weeks, the air around the island of Krk was filled with an unbearable stench. The once pristine harbor reeked of decay as the men in the iron cages cried out in agony. Exposure to the blistering Adriatic sun caused their skin to blister and peel. Without hydration, their throats cracked, their tongues swelled, and their minds unraveled. They hallucinated, screamed in languages foreign to the locals, begged for death, and ultimately slipped into comas as starvation consumed them. Local villagers were forced to watch. In fact, that was part of the punishment. Frankopan's decree was clear. Let these traitors serve as warnings. Women, children, and fishermen passing the castle had no choice but to witness the torment. Birds picked at exposed wounds, flies swarmed open eyes, and rats waited at the base of the cliffs for corpses to fall. The bodies were denied burial. Even after death, the remains were left to rot, turning iron prisons into skeletal monuments. Some cages contained more than one man, cramming 3 prisoners into a space fit for none. Historical records from the Krk monastery suggest that some prisoners lasted up to 15 days before succumbing. The monks who tried to offer water or prayers were threatened with imprisonment themselves. An anonymous friar recorded in his Latin journal, "I saw a man reach through the bars and beg for the sea. He would have rather drowned than remained a breath longer in that steel tomb." Another account told of a prisoner who gnawed his own fingers off in hunger and madness. The brutality didn't stop there. Some cages were lowered briefly so that guards could whip the captives or break their limbs before lifting them back into the sun. One Venetian noble, captured during a skirmish at sea and identified by his family seal, was reportedly branded with a hot iron on his face and left to scream until silence took him. According to oral legends, his ghost still haunts the walls of the Krk fortress, moaning when the wind passes through certain arches. This was no battle. This was a carefully orchestrated act of psychological and physical torture. While the War of Chioggia raged miles away, Krk became its own private hell, remembered not for military glory but for its showcase of medieval cruelty. The torture became infamous across the Adriatic. Venetian traders refused to dock at Krk. Genoese captains passed by in silence, their ships flying black flags in mourning. Even rival Croatian nobles condemned the Frankopan methods, but none dared intervene. The iron cages eventually fell silent, but their legacy was burned into the soil of Krk. By the early 1390s, when Venice reasserted control over much of Dalmatia, the Frankopans were forced to pay reparations. But they were never tried for their war crimes. Mikula Frankopan continued to rule parts of the island, praised by some as a strong hand against rebellion, cursed by others as a madman in noble robes. He died in his castle, never answering for the deaths he ordered. Years later, Krk's blacksmiths dismantled the rusted cages and melted them into new tools and shackles. Some pieces were rumored to have been used in church bells, turning torture instruments into instruments of worship. A small iron fragment from one such cage is reportedly stored today in a private museum in Split, labeled only, Ferro de Mort, Iron of Death. Modern archaeological digs on Krk have uncovered bones fused with rust, skulls split by blunt trauma, and evidence of human remains buried near the cliffs where the cages once hung. While many historians believe the full extent of the prisoner torture was suppressed by royal scribes, Krk's oral traditions have preserved the horror. Songs and chants from the region still reference the caged ones, especially in dirges sung during local funerals. The story of the Battle of Krk and the cage torture remains a dark mirror to medieval warfare, a reflection not just of brutality, but of how vengeance could override diplomacy, honor, and even humanity. In an age where knights boasted of valor, Krk whispered of a darker truth, that even in chivalry's shadow, the sun could become a weapon, and silence, the cruelest scream of all. The horror of Krk is rarely taught in schools. It exists in fragments, tales buried in footnotes of Croatian monastic records, ignored by Venetian archives, and whispered in local legend. Yet for those who study the darkest chapters of human history, Krk is not forgotten. It stands among the cruelest punishments ever devised, not for its speed, but for its slowness. Not for its secrecy, but for its spectacle. Torture as execution, sunlight as a blade, iron as a tomb, and history as its only witness. You've just witnessed one of the darkest punishments in history. But many more still lurk in the shadows. So if you dare, subscribe to Torture Vault, where every scream from the past still echoes.